All right, hello there. Welcome back. Today we're going to be starting a series on how to code in Python. And as you may have noticed from the title, I'm going to try to make the series a little bit more interesting. There's this thing on coding called the Ballmer peak, which that's lesson zero right there. Is the Ballmer peak is this concept that there is a blood alcohol content at which you become the best coder you can be, um, and it's not zero. Is kind of the idea. So I've experimented with this in the past in college, have gone over. Um, so I will caution you there. Um, but today we're going to learn some Python while I try to reach my Ballmer peak. I'm a couple drinks in. I've already tried recording this once and it didn't go so well because I went in with no plan. So now I have a little bit of a game plan. I have a little bit more to drink, and we're going to go ahead and get into it. So the first thing you need to know, I'm calling this lesson zero. It's because in the computer science world, we start counting at zero. Zero is a number, and it's an important number. Um, so any kind of list of things you have, it always starts at zero. It doesn't start at one. So let's just knock that out right now. Lesson zero. So we're going to do some things here. We're going to go through an introduction of just kind of overall themes, some basic concepts about Python, how to find your best coding environment, and then we're going to write some programs. Um, and we're going to kind of wing that part. I'm not entirely sure what I want to write, but we're just going to go over some very basic stuff. I don't want to overload you on the first one. So, introduction. Why learn Python? It can do really cool things. You can do anything from machine learning to automation, um, to just like having a simple program to like update the weather and give you like a forecast. So it's pretty cool. I've done some different things with it. I've written my stock trading bot in Python. I've also had random little scripts that would like pop up a YouTube window every 30 minutes on my computer to tell me to take a break from studying. Um, some different stuff like that. How does it work? Well, it works really good. Um, it's very simple. I think it's a very good language to learn off the bat because it is easy to read by us, and it does all of the kind of more complicated taking it into computer language in the back end. Like it does a lot of stuff for you that some lower level languages like C would not do for you. Um, so that's why knowing how it works is something we'll get into a little bit later in the lessons. For right now, just know that there's a lot of stuff with Python that happens in the background, which is nice because then you don't have to worry about it. And we will understand it later, but for now, it's nice because you can get into writing code and making some stuff happen without fully understanding how it's doing all of it in the background. Is it a good first language to learn? I would say that any languages. I'm partial to Python a little bit. I had some quarrels about it when I started because I had a lot of instructors that said, "Oh, Python is not the first language you should learn." And then in my major, it was the first language we were taught. But looking back, I don't see any problems with it because really learning to code is about learning to solve problems. It's not about learning a specific language. You can Google syntax. That's what we have the internet. Like if you were doing this back at the beginning, like the dawn of computer times, and you really had to know everything or look it up in a book, it'd be a little bit different. Maybe you want to start with a different language. But now, like if I want to write something in a different language, I just have to look up syntax, which syntax means like how something is written in that coding language. Um, but Python is good because it's really easy to solve problems with Python. You don't have to do a lot of thinking about, oh, is the computer going to understand this? Because Python makes sure the computer does. So moving into some basic concepts, Python is object-oriented. So what that means is it's about the way that you write the code. You're going to write it in, I would say, an intuitive way. It's the way most people think, which is why it's good. Some other languages are not object-oriented, and you will notice the difference if you go to write in those. But for now, I just want you to know that Python is object-oriented because that's kind of a common thing that people might say. So we'll get into it a little bit later what that actually means. But for now, just know that that's a fact. That is something. Python is a higher level language. So as I was talking about, some languages don't do stuff for you in the background that Python does. And that's because Python is higher level. So I would say in the simplest terms, higher level means it is easier for you to understand it than it is for the computer to. Lower level is where you start getting more and more toward the computer understands it. You have to do a little bit more thinking to kind of understand what's going on, to the point where the lowest level would be like zeros and ones. Like the computer looks at that shit, eats it up. You have a very hard time going through zeros and ones and figuring out what the actual code is in human readable terms, like what's actually going on. So Python is higher level because it's going to be kind of like, you'll notice you write something we would say pseudocode to solve a problem. So you're kind of just writing out how you want to go about solving the problem. Like, okay, if this happens, then I want this to happen. And then to make that into Python, it's literally just if this colon, then, or if this, then that, or that. That's where you put the that. So it really is kind of intuitive, which is really nice as a first language. And the last basic concept, I mentioned this earlier, understanding coding is more about being a problem solver and understanding how to think through a problem logically than it is about memorizing how to do something specific, how to write a specific syntax in Python or in any language. So now the first thing you're going to actually need to do if you want to get into coding is set up a coding environment. There are a bunch of options, each have benefits and drawbacks, and this is going to be dependent on your OS. I would say most people are probably on Windows. If you're using a Linux right now, you probably already know how to code Python better than me. So what I like to use is Visual Studio Code, which we have right here. The reason I like to use it is because it interacts very well with my Windows environment. And if I type Python syntax, so like that is not Python syntax. It's just random things. So it says like, this is not defined. What are you doing? It kind of gives you those little alerts as you go along. And it'll also highlight things in different colors, as you'll see here in a tutorial that I did on how to use Python to make an automated bot. It'll give you these like different highlights, like it knows these are a certain thing, so it highlights them a certain way, and it makes it very easy to read, as opposed to, you could do it in Notepad, which I have done before for small things, but that is going to be a little bit less easy. You're going to have to remember to do stuff on your own that your development environment could do for you. So just really pick what works best for you. There's not really a right answer. In addition to this environment or text editor, you're going to need have Python downloaded, which I'm not going to make a tutorial on that, at least not for now, because there are a million of them online, and it's not something I feel like I need to spend my time doing. And a command line where you can execute your code. I use PowerShell right here. So what's going to happen is we're going to write Python code here. So whatever. We're going to come over here. We're going to type this Python 3, that's the version, and then Python basics.py. And it's going to execute whatever code we write over here on the command line. So with all of that said, we're going to go ahead and get into writing our first program. So if you have both of these things done, or if not, you can just follow along for now, get it set up later, and then you'll know how to do it. Excuse me. So, first things first, the first program almost everybody writes is going to be called Hello World. So all this is going to do, this print statement, is going to take what is inside of these quotation marks here, and it's going to print it into your command line. So, something I didn't mention before we even get into that. You need to ensure before you try to run this code, you have to be in the same folder. So I'm in a folder called YouTube that contains, we can do ls, stands for list, Python basics.py. So it is in the folder that I am currently in. Clear gets rid of everything that's on there and gives you a fresh page. So we're in the same folder. this Python basics.py has this command in it, print, and it tells you a little bit about what it does when you pull it up, hover over it in this development environment. Prints the value to a stream or to sys.standardout by default. Sys.standardout is going to be this command line. So if we run our code, Python 3, Python basics.py, it is going to say hello to us. So that is all the print statement does. It's going to print to the command line, or as we get more advanced, you can comma here, put somewhere else for it to print to. For now, what you want to know, print, quotation marks, or a variable, prints out to the command line. So let's say we didn't want to print hello world. We wanted to print a variable. In Python, to declare a variable, all you need to do is, we'll call it Carl, and we'll make Carl equal to 5. That's it. So now Carl is a variable. It's a box. You can put anything in the box. You can put 5. You can put 5.5. You could put a bunch of letters. If you put a bunch of letters, you have to put it in quotations. That is how Python understands that this here is a string of characters. That's its type. An important concept is that variables have types. So a string, a bunch of letters, or letters and spaces, like hello world, this here is a string. Has to be in quotations for Python to understand it. This 5 is an integer. That's pretty self-explanatory. Everybody knows 5 is an integer. Where it gets a little bit more complicated is if we do this. So that is no longer an integer. We would call that a float, spelled just the way you'd think, float. And why that gets a little bit complicated is because the way it's stored on the computer, on the actual hard drive, like in the bits itself, is different. Like this 5 is stored in a completely different way than a 5.5 would be. And then what's going to make that even a little bit more complicated is, so let's say we have this 5.5, and then we want to go down here, and we want to print it. We want to print Carl. That's all fine and dandy. We can do that. So we'll go over here, save it. We'll go over here, run our code again, 5.5. So that's great. So then something interesting is going to happen here if we try to make Carl into an integer. What's going to happen here is Python is going to look at that. I didn't save it. Python is going to look at this and say, well, 5.5 isn't an integer. I need to make it into an integer, and I'm just going to do it. And it becomes 5 again. So that's not going to happen in a consistent way. That's going to be something that's something you need to watch out for, I would say. All right, sorry about that. I am back. So as we were saying, it's going to become a little interesting if we want to take some input from users. Let's say num1, that's going to be our variable, equals another crucial kind of beginner thing to learn, input. What input is going to do is it's going to print whatever is in here. So we'll say, please enter a number, right? It is going to print what's in there and then wait for the user over here to type in something. Whatever they type in goes into this num1 variable. Num2, same thing, input, please enter a second number. And the reason I put this little colon and space at the end is just for looks. Because when they enter the number, it's going to start right where this ends. So we'll just do a quick test of this, make sure we didn't mess anything up. That's another good concept to learn early on, is test as you go. I've often fallen into the trap of writing an entire program and then going to try to run the whole thing, and obviously it doesn't work because I didn't test as I went. And then going back through and finding the problems and correcting them is a pain. All right, so please enter a number. Don't worry about that spelling. So we'll just say 5. Enter. 7. Enter. Nothing happens because we don't have anything else going on in the code here. We just have please enter numbers. And now we know that works, and we know that I misspelled number. So now let's say we want to take those numbers, and how about we'll call answer equals num1 plus num2. And then we'll say print answer. So this is a good illustration of a common issue and something that has to do with types that we talked about earlier. This input here, if we hover over it, Visual Studio, and you can find this online in any kind of documentation for Python, this input function that's built in reads a string from standard input. String is the key part there. You can't add strings together in the way that you would expect. So if we go back over here, this is saved. We're going to run this. Please enter a number. 5, 7, 57. So when you use this plus sign with 2 strings, what it's going to do is concatenate those strings, which really just means smash them together. Now answer is the string that's the combination of these two. So to kind of illustrate that a little bit, let's say, please enter a number. I'm a rebel. Hello. Second number, world. And then the return is going to be those 2 strings smushed together. Hello, world. No spaces because I didn't put any spaces here. I didn't put any spaces at the end of hello. To fix that and make this do what we want it to do, we're going to put int num1 and int num2. Save that. Now if we run it, please enter number. 5, second number, 7, 12. So that's something you need to look out for, and that's a great way to kind of explore what happens when you don't. I will say that something else you need to think about is the user's not going to do what you want all the time. So if I just want to break your code, I put in something that's not a number, and it's going to say invalid. I can't make this random string of characters that was just entered into a number. So that's where you'd want to add some checks and stuff like that as you move forward. We're going to expand on this further. I think we're going to go ahead and make a calculator, like a full-on calculator, as we go forward. But I think for now this is good. I don't want to overload. So go ahead and get your environment set up. Do a little bit of messing around with some inputs, some print functions, maybe some basic math going on in here. And then next episode we'll go into some if statements, some conditionals. Like if the user enters this number, then we're going to do this. If the user enters a different number, we're going to do something else, stuff like that. But with all that said, I hope you enjoyed this. I hope it was good. I'm going to keep trying to perfect the Ballmer curve. I think I went a little over this time because I wouldn't say I was completely on my game here. But I had a good time. I hope you learned something. If you did, please leave a like, subscribe. There'll be more coming. I think the next thing we're going to do is probably more of that tutorial on how to use an API. If you already understand Python pretty well, that's a good place to go do something fun with it. But we will continue to post more of these kind of basic Python tutorials to get you kind of up to speed on how to use Python. And then from there, you can watch more API videos. You can do really cool stuff with it. So with all that said, thank you so much if you stuck around, watched this far. I hope you have a great day, and I will see you next time.